I'm John Willis at Opscode, John at Opscode.com. And I'm also Bachkaloop is my stupid Twitter name, so I'm stuck with it. But I've been doing infrastructure for like 30 years. I spent a lot of time around the IBM ecosystem in infrastructure. Got a lot of battle scars doing Tivoli stuff. Last 3 or 4 years, really been focusing on cloud, and I'm kind of an ADD entrepreneur guy, right? So now DevOps is really cool to me. So I'll kind of squeeze that in. I do a couple of podcasts that if you're interested in anything I have to say today, you might want to check it out. One is called the IT Management Podcast with Red Monk, Michael Cote. I call us the click and clack of IT management. I've also started this DevOps Cafe, which is a lot of fun. In fact, I'll make some references to it. And I think the reason why I was invited here is about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, I started this thing called Cloud Cafe, and people thought I was reasonably, not really smart, but just good enough. Now here's the thing, right? So that really cool picture of me in a fedora and a guitar, just one tip, like a parenting tip, don't give your kid your password to Twitter, because they'll change your icon to something crazy like this. And so now I'm Dr. Dr. Evil Doofenshmirtz. Yeah, so it's okay, I guess. So clouds, right? So we're here to talk about clouds. So which one you want? Big one, small one, tall one, skinny ones? The thing is I saw a great presentation about a year and a half ago. A guy talked about cloud security, and I'm not going to talk about cloud security. But the first thing he said is we can't talk about clouds unless we actually pick the cloud we're going to talk about, right? Because it's kind of silly to say cloud and you have one guy in the panel here talking about something like Amazon and the other guy over here talking about Salesforce.com and arguing over security, right? So I'm picking one for this presentation. I'm picking infrastructure as a service, right? And there's the usual suspects there if you're familiar with cloud. And this is not going to be what is a cloud presentation. I usually beat people up who start those things. But everybody having fun yet? Sort of, kind of. Good. I just want to make sure we're all on the same, because I'm having fun. So cloudy operations. This is what Simon asked me to talk about, right? So what? You don't get that with the cloud? No, son. The operations, you have to do that. So the thing is, there's some box that shows up 2 weeks later. That's this operations stuff, right? So I was thinking, people talk about the cloud, and they're like, well, doesn't Amazon do that? Yeah, they actually supply your network administrator, your sysadmin, all those guys come, there's a checkbox that you hit, right scale checkbox. Oh, the operations, everything else happens, right? So the thing is, is operations pixie dust, right? Am I supposed to get that with the cloud? Do I have to do all this other work too? I thought the cloud was really cool, right? So the question is, does your provider, did they lie to you? Right? So, they naughty didn't lie. They were pretty, they were very aggressive about how cool it was. I went to about 2 years ago, I went to an Amazon boot camp, right? And there was all these enterprise customers in there. And they went through all the APIs. They were all Java developers. And I'm the only non-developer in the whole thing. And at the end, they're like, okay, this is cool. So where's all that load balancing and auto-scaling and all? And this was before Amazon had their stuff. And Instructor's was like, what are you talking about? All that cloud stuff we're all. There is no such thing, guys. You got to do that yourself, right? And since then, there's been a lot of services. So I figured I'd throw this in just for a laugh, right? So the thing is here, 30 years I've been doing this, right? And I consider myself an ops guy. I mean, does anybody disagree with this? I tend to point to people I know who sit in the front row. Infrastructure is hard. Death, taxes, and infrastructure is hard. Fully automated infrastructure is really, really hard, right? So if you look at some of these, what we call DevOps-like operations, right? It's from request to money, to request to cash, right? What does it take to build these things, right? You got orchestration, you got scheduling, we'll talk about configuration management, release management, monitoring, event management, trending, workflow. God forbid we're going to talk about a CMDB. And what does that mean, right? So, that stuff doesn't come in that box. You don't get it, right? There's a lot of pieces that are involved in infrastructure, whether you're 20 servers or, 50,000 servers, right? So the point is that I say that, like I say this stupid thing, like a data center is a data center is a data center, right? And the cloud doesn't fix that, right? What the cloud did for us is reduce the barrier of entry to owning a data center, right? The 4 startups that start up and they're 15 people, and a year later they're 300 people and 80 million in revenue, right? That silly farm game everybody plays, right? So, right, these things happen. So, business as usual. Again, we still have to. So the point I'm making, right, maybe going way too long on this point, is that it's not free. There's some services that make it look like it's free, but we're still in the data center game, whether it's a cloud or not a cloud, right? And for any old timers, right, that's an interesting acronym. So we still need monitoring, right? And again, some clouds offer it as a service, but the thing is, we still want to do performance management. We still want to do log management. In fact, about a year and a half ago, I got involved in some startup where they brought me in, and they, because it's like, John, come in and like look at our infrastructure. And it was a bunch of enterprise folks, like enterprise architecture, Java, heavy Java, and they started showing me all these designs of how they built a really cool decoupled architecture. I mean, it's really exciting. And I'm like, why in the heck you guys bring me in here? I mean, I'm not the guide analyst. And then they listed the page of all the things that they hadn't done yet, like these things. You see why I was having a problem with the clicker, right? So, and I was like, oh, I get it. You brought the enterprise architects with you for this whole Amazon-based cloud. Looks like a SOA-based architecture in Amazon infrastructure, but you forgot to bring the operators, right? So they were like clueless on like, what do I use for log management? The Java enterprise guys don't know those. I mean, they kind of know, right? Splunk is a pretty cool product, and there's some cool open source. How do you do event correlation, event management? How do people know how to do that stuff at scale? Does capacity planning go away with the cloud? You got a guy that would argue would kill you, maybe, that if you told that to him. And what's also interesting now is analytics gets really exciting at scale. So now we can collect a lot of data. I was at Shopzilla recently, this DevOps cafe I do. We did an interview with the guys who run the kind of requirement to cache from a visualization standpoint. I mean, in other words, they watch the 4 corners of their business, 4,000 servers, probably about 25 or 30 really mature applications, and they collected 85,000 metrics per second. They're throwing that into a Cassandra database, and they're graphing the whole thing, and guess what? The NOC shows what that business is doing. Right? I haven't seen that in like 20 years of working with Tivoli products. Sorry if anybody's from IBM here. I've never seen anything like that in the largest banks that I've been in for most of my career. Right? So what tools, right? So, like another guy who's like does a developer who became the sysadmin, common story in the startup world. Like he was asking me all these questions like, what do I do with Nagios? I think I should use it. How do I use it, right? So there's a lot of tools that you have to do. So monitoring, again, is, I've got 20 minutes. I can't go into detail. This is where my heart and soul is right now. It's provisioning, right? So there's other things like security, and there's a lot of things about cloud operations and orchestration and release management. But the two that are near and dear to my heart are the monitoring and primarily provisioning. And provisioning is interesting in the cloud because it really has gotten very cloudy. Sorry, I had to say that. Right? And it really got cloudy a couple of years ago because, like 5 years ago, provisioning was an easy concept. It was basically booting bare metal servers. Maybe 8 years ago. I don't know, right? And then this stupid virtualization came along, sorry. And they like somehow like threw some APIs in. And then Amazon came along with like completely code-based APIs. Right? So what is provisioning? And I watch cloud experts and they say, in the cloud you need monitoring and you need provisioning. And I say, what about configuration management? Yeah. Well, isn't that provisioning? I don't know, depending on what your definition is. So I say there's actually, when we talk about provisioning, there's 3 pieces. Right? There's provisioning, configuration management, and there's what I call the last mile, which is system integration. Right? So provisioning is, from my definition, I went back and I looked at what Gartner, I said, I'm going to present this thing at OSCON, I better like see what Gartner says so I don't really look like an idiot. And so, and they don't even have a definition. You know, in 2008 was their last magic quadrant for configuration management. And even back then, they had it kind of all screwed up. Right? So they didn't even really have a category for what this, like, crazy new stuff is. Right? And so what provisioning is, whether it's bare metal, virtualization, or it's cloud-based, is give me 6 instances. Give me 6 servers. And what you get is 6 servers. And those 6 servers, as far as you're concerned, are green blobs. Now, they may be like fully baked images with pre-installed software. But guess what? It's still a green blob to you. Because all you know about it, maybe, is the image ID, the IP address, and the resolution of the host name. Right? So, so whether you take this concept of just enough operating system, where you say, I'm going to just build an image that gets an agent on it, that then turns it into something, which, by the way, is what I call configuration management, or you have fully baked images. Patrick Pan's going to talk about Cohesive FT, right? They have a great solution of baking really cool images, right? You still need configuration management. At the very least, you want to register what the freak are the roles of those servers, right? And because guess what? In this picture, what am I missing? Anybody? Come on, one brave soul. The lines connecting those things, right? Because guess what? Even when I do configuration management, how does the load balancer know what the web servers are, if it's a virtual, even if it's hardware-based? How does the web server know what the database master is? So I did some consulting for actually under Simon at Canonical, right? And so we'd go around, we'd try to preach Ubuntu Enterprise Cloud, right? Which is a really interesting cloud solution. And one of the things that we talked to is Java guys, and they'd say, John, cloud schmoud. He says, what I want is, I want to take a WAR file, and I want to put it somewhere, and I want you to build an infrastructure around it. And that's all I want to do, because the only thing I want to do is test the goddamn thing. And when I turn it over to QA, I want it to be the same environment. And if you're really nice to me, test QA and production will look exactly the same. And so I don't want to get to 2/3 of the way there by provisioning. I can do that with APIs. I can find an open source configuration management tool to probably, or script the configuration management, like turn that box into a load balancer, turn this box into a web server. But what I really want is, don't want to spend another 3 days installing and updating config files to basically have the load balancer know automatically, automation, what the web servers are. Have the web servers know where the database master is. So I'm not going to bore you with code. We'll put this up. But this is an example of like a code base that would say, this is a thing called a web server, and it has some roles, and we want it to become Apache. We want it to become ModSS Apache. And then, you know, the load balancers, I'm going to go out and find out. I got this now repository because I know what these things are. They're not just green blobs. So tell me who all my web servers are. Turn it in, this happens to be Ruby code, turn it into a hash, and now I can set the config file based on the output of what I know are my web servers. Right, so I want to go from this to this. So DevOps. So somebody said DevOps, right? It was a guy, DevOps, right? So DevOps is, you know, pretty cool right now. It's an interesting story, what's happening. You've been paying attention. The first presentation I ever gave on DevOps, somebody sent me this. This was actually Dilbert comment that day, right? So talk about irony, right? So this is what, you know, I was like, this is really cool, right? So what DevOps really is, and I'm not going to bore you, there's a lot of cool things, is really DevOps. People say, well, John, you say Opscode is DevOps. I'm like, no. I say DevOps is what I call CAMS. It's culture first, people, process, right? Again, I was talking to CIO recently, and he told me that when they get in the war room, the problem is the enemy, not developers versus operations, right? It's a way of thinking. If you think about, like I've actually had the opportunity or misery to actually hire salespeople and manage salespeople, right? And so you want to get salespeople to do a really good job, get a big whiteboard and put their numbers on the board. And guess what? The worst thing that you can do to a sales rep is throw a big donut under their month. That big zero sign, right? So this one shop, in fact, Shopzilla, another Shopzilla story, what they do, they wrote a private cloud, right? And instead of spending a ton of time on that private cloud, they used like OpenVZ. It was a really interesting project. They built it from their own kind of DNA. They built it in Perl. But one of the things that was really interesting about this private cloud was it had some features in it that I hadn't seen in some of the real, monster private clouds out there, right? And there were simple things like the scheduling, the give back. But here's the thing I thought was the coolest, and this is the culture story too, was that instead of writing a bunch of code to basically figure out who's using what resources and should I give you this and take away that, right? All they did is they created that big sales board. And you know what? Guess who policed the use of that system? The developers. Right? When there were no more resources left, they bring up a screen and it showed who was using all the resources. They picked up the phone and said, why do you got 150 instances running now pegged? They're like, oh, shoot, I forgot to turn those off. Ching. Right? So culture is a big part of DevOps. It's this devs versus ops versus we need to get along, right? Automation should be obvious, right? I mean, you need to automate as much as you can, right? Where you can, automate. Measurement, that shop I told you is Shopzilla, 85,000 metrics. I mean, if you listen to some of the leaders, the thought leaders in DevOps right now, they measure everything. They measure things about people. They measure things about process. They throw it in the same database with the measurement of their CPU usage, all that stuff. And there's really cool tool now to aggregate that stuff. We talked about Hadoop and stuff like that, right? People are getting to the point where they're collecting ridiculous amount of data and actually rising it up to where you can make some sense of it. So measure everything as much as you can, as often you can, right? So cloudy operations. And then, if you like open source, which you should since you're here at OSCON, share your story. Don't think, well, I don't want my competitors to know what I'm doing because they're going to basically figure out what I'm doing and I'm so smart. They'll get as smart as me, right? Just the people that embrace DevOps, they want to tell their story. They want to tell you what they're doing. So what developers need in a cloudy operations? Right? They just want it easy, right? Right? They want self-service operations. I've been an ops guy for 30 years, right? And so this part of this DevOps debate is, are we saying we don't need operations anymore? Are we saying that operations are stupid? Are we saying that the developers are better than? No, we're not saying that. What we're saying is our job in operations, particularly cloudy operations, is to build an infrastructure that allows the developers to get and do what they need. Those guys with the WAR file, right? What do they want? They don't want to install code, configure files, test things, make mistakes, break things in production. The infrastructure is the application. Minimize bottlenecks. They want the right tools. So what do ops guys need? So I apologize for the people who've heard this joke 15 times, but it's funny. Ops guys were like cicadas. Every 17 years or so, infrastructure gets really freaking cool, right? If you've been around for as long as I have, right? It's just some big old thing happens and things start getting crazy and wild. Well, we're right there right now. Mark was talking about Cambrian, right? I got a presentation I did at an OSQL keynote, right? And it was the Cambrian cloud explosion. We're in a Cambrian explosion right now, right? Whether I loved your presentation, whether the enterprise wants it or not, you're in denial if you don't understand what Simon was saying about the difference between provisioning, the time that we can do things and the amount and the numbers that we do things. I have another presentation I give where I talk about the history of configuration management, and it starts with a company that did 65,000 servers, and it took them almost a year to configure. It was like painting a bridge. I'm on a conversation with a gaming company 3 weeks ago where they want the possibility to update 10,000 servers so they want to get to a desired state of 10,000 servers in under 5 minutes. A year ago, I would have said, you are out of your freaking mind, right? So what do we want in operations? I tell you for 30 years, I just want to have fun. So if you haven't read this great book right now, it's out, you want to know about what these WebOps, DevOps, I like to call them BizOps people are thinking, John Allspaw, Jesse Robbins, who's my boss, CEO of Opscode, we need to say yes. We didn't really like racking and stacking. I didn't. We've never been more critical, right? Or it's a good time to be in operations. We need to get out of the way, right? And there's this concept of Agile Infrastructure. Agile Infrastructure, right? So you look at development and the Agile principles. In operations, we need to become more Agile, right? So we've been accused of being the waterfall process, right? We've got all these Scrum, and we build things really fast. I've got a company that not only did they, at the end of every sprint, did they rebuild their code base, they actually rebuild their infrastructure, right? So they run what they call infrastructure as code, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to just hit to this. My last famous great slide here is that, so in that book, the operations, the CTO of my company has this kind of first part of the chapter where he talks about infrastructure as code. He says, a tornado hits, right? So you pause your movie, put down the popcorn. You sign into your cloud provider. You upload or download your backups. You provision, configure, and you integrate the servers. You change DNS to point to the, hey, we've been hit by a tornado. Check back in 3 minutes. Restore the customer's data. Remove the, we've been hit by the tornado. Unpause the movie, pick up your popcorn. Chapter 5. So in a cloudy world, the prime constraint should be the time it takes to restore your application data. I'll skip through this, recipes, tell two startups, tell you about it. One last thing, right? So anybody know who this guy is? You shouldn't, but he's kind of cool. His name's Hal Varian. He's the chief economist for Google, right? And he talks about cloud and economy, right? It's cool. And he has this idea about a period of combinatorial innovation. So everything I said about cloudy operations is about like the past. So what's the future look like, right? Like we embrace failure, right? We have fault-tolerant components. We talk about things like CAP theorem, right? So we have this opportunity to rethink what failures and events mean in this world, right? We have this opportunity to develop things in a decoupled infrastructure, network-accessible infrastructure, unlimited. So be bold, and mighty forces will come to your aid.